The member for Kenora-Rainy River.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to say good morning to you as well as the members of this House and the folks who are, of course, watching from home. Today we're talking about a very important topic, and that's, of course, auto insurance rates, which is something that is it acutely affects the folks who live in my riding of Kenora-Rainy River. I don't think there's any question that we need to make some significant reforms to auto insurance across the province. People are stretched to the max and they can't afford essentials. Many people are struggling just to find jobs and to stay afloat. I mean, certainly we see that in Kenora-Rainy River. Auto insurance rates are another cost that people are concerned about because the premiums keep escalating, and yet insurance is mandatory if people need to drive. And in the north, of course, we have to drive. We don't have the luxury of public transportation. That's something that I've talked about a fair bit since being elected. The other point is that we've seen, a fairly significant downturn in our economy in the Northwest, and that's put many people in the unenvious position of needing to travel for work. And we're seeing a lot of people who are doing the regular commute to Alberta, and to do that, of course, that means that they have to pay for all the expenses that go along with it. So everything from a driver's license, vehicle payments, maintenance, snow tires, which of course is a reality in the north, gasoline, and what we're talking about today, auto insurance. It's no wonder that in 2013, 90% of the respondents to my annual budget survey said that lower auto insurance premiums are either a high or an extremely high priority for them in their everyday lives. People are also struggling to understand why rates are so high. In 2010, which has already been mentioned this morning, this government made changes that benefited the auto insurance industry greatly, where premiums increased and accident benefits were slashed. In fact, benefits were essentially halved. And I'll never forget the volume of people who came forward to the constituency office with their previous and their current year's coverage details in hand, asking, how can this be? How can it be that our benefits are essentially halved, yet we are paying more? How could it possibly be allowed to happen? And I recall even then how people were struggling to stay afloat. And the response from the government was, of course, that these changes would in turn be passed down to consumers and that they would see substantial savings. In this House, when we've debated this bill previously, I also mentioned the fact that I was in, I guess you could say, possibly the wrong place at the wrong time, and was involved in a head-on collision just outside my house on the Trans-Canada Highway, and it was on or about August 26, 2010. And I didn't really at that time know the significance of that, but when I went to seek some aftercare, going to see the chiropractor and these kinds of things, there was a lot of concern that that my treating specialists were giving me, because they said if I would have had my accident 4 days later, I wouldn't have been entitled to nearly anywhere near the same benefits as just being hit those 4 days prior. So again, with all those folks who've come in the office, we've seen that those changes have not been passed on to consumers. And that argument, by making some of those changes and that those savings will be passed on to consumers, sounds a little like what we're talking about today. Here we are 4 years later, we're talking about making some significant changes, and we're told that if consumers kind of tighten their belts and kind of take their lumps, that we'll see that translate into premiums. But I'm not so sure. I'm not so convinced, because we've heard this before and it hasn't translated to those savings. We never did see those other savings materialize. Ontarians are expecting this government to lower auto insurance premiums as they promised in their 2013 budget. And this is a big reason why I chose to support the 2013 budget. But this government has failed to deliver those changes as promised. And just bringing back a little bit of just a reminder to folks, I mean, that's one of the big reasons why I decided that I couldn't support the 2014 budget, is because in 2013 we carefully negotiated a very small list of things, about 5 things. And then we flash forward a year later, and we didn't see any action on those 5 simple, very easy to implement things. And so I didn't have any confidence at that point that this government would then be able to reasonably implement the 70-plus promises that were in this 2014 budget. So the fact is that costs need to go down, but the question is, are these proposed changes the answer? And I think in order to really assess that, we need to look at some of the changes that this government seeks. And I'm going to look at about 3 particular changes. The first is with respect to tow and storage services. And my concern with this aspect is that it leaves so much up to regulation. And I just wanted to explain the part, or reference the part of the explanatory note that I'm referring to. There are some changes that are being made to the Highway Traffic Act, and it reads, "The Highway Traffic Act is amended in 2 main areas, the regulation of commercial motor vehicles and tow trucks, and the enforcement of the Act generally by the addition of administrative penalties. In respect of commercial motor vehicles, the Act is amended as follows." I'm just going to read 2 points. The first is to repeal the definition of commercial motor vehicle in subsection 16(1) of the Act and replace it with the authority to define the term by regulation. And then, if you flip the page, point 5, which is to prohibit drivers and other persons in charge of tow trucks from engaging in activities prescribed by regulation. So here we are debating whether we are going to agree with something in principle, but we don't know the details. And to me, that's concerning. And then further to that, it goes on to talk about general enforcement and some of the penalties, which are not to exceed $20,000. So this is significant. And I don't think that this type of language and this type of approach bodes well for a government that has been anything but transparent. We've seen Orange, we've seen eHealth, the gas plants, now the Pan Am Games, and some of the secrecy around the privatization of our public assets like Hydro One, OPG, and the LCBO. And I find it, and I'm sure many Ontarians find it, a little difficult to trust that this government will go into the back rooms to supplement the bill with regulations that will actually help the people of this province. If anything, I believe that we need to keep a bright light shining on every nook and cranny of this government, and just approving something kind of carte blanche with a very rough skeletal frame is not the way to go. And the second piece that I wanted to review is dispute resolutions, especially the statutory accident benefits. Ontario has a hybrid insurance system that accommodates both tort, which is negligence, pain and suffering, and no-fault claims, so accident benefits, home care, and income replacement, among others. In some cases, have both a tort and a no-fault component. But prohibiting the court system as an option for all disputes with a no-fault component means a claimant with both a tort and a no-fault case will have to appear in court and in front of a tribunal separately. And this change essentially removes the court option as an avenue of appeal on the no-fault side. This is confusing, and it's expensive for the victim, who will have to pay the added costs of having a representative, obviously represent them when it comes to the 2 different levels. I mean, if anything, we should be wanting to streamline some of these changes, make it easier for accident victims to pursue their rights. And this is, as I see it, very much a step backwards. And the third aspect that I wanted to look at in terms of this bill is prejudgment interest and some of the changes around there. Prejudgment interest is the amount of interest an insurance company needs to pay based on the length of time it takes from the incident to the resolution. It is presently set at 5% of whatever the total is determined to be for pain and suffering. This amount can be significant for insurance companies, and it acts as a deterrent from dragging on a settlement. Presently, a pain and suffering award of, say, $50,000 that has been delayed by 3 years would result in an additional $7,500 being paid in interest to the victim. Under these proposed changes, however, that same pain and suffering award of $50,000 that has been delayed by 3 years would only be subject to a prejudgment interest rate of 1.3%, and that would translate to about $1,950. So going from 5% down to 1.3%, and I would say it's in everyone's best interest to resolve these things quickly, but really for the victim of an accident, who has, it's through no fault of their own that they find themselves in these situations. We need to make sure that we have timely compensation for them. And it really doesn't encourage insurance companies to settle within a reasonable amount of time, and it's really not fair for accident victims. So, in summary of some of the things that I've talked about, there's no doubt that we need to bring insurance premiums down in the province of Ontario. Not only do they need to be reduced, but I believe they need to be reduced in favour of the consumer. As mentioned, 90% of my constituents in Kenora-Rainy River have identified lower auto insurance premiums as a high or extremely high priority for them. And the other point that needs to be made is that auto insurance is a mandatory service. It's not a luxury add-on that drivers can opt in to purchase. And I believe that consequently, we have an obligation to provide this essential service in a manner that is as lean as possible, with as little overhead and superfluous charges as possible. The purpose of auto insurance should be to provide coverage if the worst happens, not line pockets or pad wallets of folks in the insurance industry. And that's where I really have to take issue with the previous speaker, the member from the Conservative caucus, arguing that companies are leaving Ontario in droves. I think this legislation, as it is currently proposed, largely benefits the auto insurance industry. And is the auto insurance industry upset about the previously negotiated 15% reduction? I imagine they are. Are they doing all that they can to bolster their profits? Sure, I would argue that that's the nature of business. But make no mistake, the industry is not poor. But I would argue that those who are poor or are struggling to get by are essentially, the people of this province who are struggling already to make ends meet. And they are the ones who deserve our attention right now. They are simply asking for some balance to the system. Balance. And I think that's fair. In 2010, as I mentioned, there were substantial changes that were made on the part of this government to assist the auto insurance industry in reducing their costs. But despite changes to reduce costs, these savings have not been passed on to consumers. It's been reported that there was only one company that passed on these savings to their consumers. And so when it comes to these changes, which are largely seen to benefit the auto insurance industry, people are understandably skeptical that these changes, are they even going to result in any substantial savings for consumers? However, it does need to be said that reducing auto insurance fraud is always an important target and something that we should be striving towards. The problem with the proposed changes in this bill seems that my House Leader is very important this morning. But to continue on, the problem with these changes in this bill is that they aren't balanced or fair for consumers. Whether it is reducing the prejudgment interest rate or increasing legal representation costs by forcing victims to bring forward tort and no-fault claims separately through a court and tribunal and removing some of their appeal options, it's not positive for consumers. And some of these points, as I mentioned, are so vague that we don't know what the government plans to do with them, such as making unspecified changes to the commercial motor vehicle definition, imposing restrictions on CVOR certificates, and some other things. I would argue that we are beyond the point of giving this government the benefit of the doubt when it comes to sketching out the details later on in the back room. The bottom line is that there are other ways to bring down auto insurance premiums by 15% across this province, and that there are other places to squeeze. But paying for the reductions out of the pockets of accident victims is disgusting, and it's wrong.